Welcome to the Deep Dive, your essential shortcut to navigating the most exhilarating and, well, ever-changing challenges in technology today.
Definitely ever-changing.
And when it comes to cybersecurity, we're not just observing. We're really in a constant evolving battle where adversaries are always adapting. Always.
It's a continuous high-stakes chess match, demanding constant vigilance and strategic thinking.
Absolutely. Today, we're taking a deep dive into the critical world of advanced incident response and threat hunting. We've dissected a rich set of materials for you, pulling insights straight from the SANS FR 508 course and a really compelling real-world scenario.
Our mission for you, our listener, is to give you that strategic advantage. This deep dive isn't just about, understanding the latest threats. It's about grasping how the best defenders are actually fighting back.
Right.
We're going to unpack some surprising facts and practical techniques, helping you gain that well-informed edge and gain it fast.
And to ground our discussion in a tangible context, we're going to keep coming back to the Stark Research Labs, or SRL, intrusion scenario. So imagine SRL, a leading high-tech innovator, right? Fields like biotech, advanced alloys.
Prime target territory.
Exactly, making them a prime target for state-sponsored adversaries. They're currently facing a sophisticated threat actor codenamed Crimson Osprey. This isn't just theory. It's a living case study that'll anchor our discussion and bring these concepts to life.
Okay, so let's begin by looking at just how much the threat landscape has shifted. It's quite dramatic, actually.
Yeah, for years it really felt like most organizations were just struggling to detect intrusions. The picture was often, well, bleak.
It was.
But there's a powerful shift underway. Mandiant's M-Trends 2023 report highlights massive improvements in internal detection capabilities. And what's truly transformative is the dramatic reduction in dwell time. That critical period an attacker remains undetected inside a network.
And that's huge.
It's a game changer because less dwell time means less opportunity for damage.
It's definitely a positive trend, but we have to counterbalance that, right? We must acknowledge the alarming speed of our adversaries. CrowdStrike reported that in 2022, the average breakout time for e-crime attackers.
Breakout time being?
Good point.
Yeah.
That's the period it takes an intruder to begin moving laterally once they have that initial foothold.
Got it.
And that time was a mere 84 minutes.
Wow, 84 minutes.
Yeah. This statistic just underscores the urgent need for incredibly mature security teams and, frankly, exceptional network visibility. You have to see what's happening.
And the threats themselves come from diverse sources. We're talking nation-state actors, often called advanced persistent threats, or APTs.
The big players.
Right. Then organized crime syndicates and hacktivists, too. The reality for most organizations is that they largely need to fend for themselves. Law enforcement agencies, they're simply overwhelmed by the volume and sophistication.
They really are.
So this deep dive is about empowering you to be part of that solution.
Exactly. And to effectively navigate and respond to these incidents, we rely on a foundational model, the six-step incident response process. This framework, it's comprehensive, it originated from U.S. government agencies, and it's well documented by NIST.
Think of it as our essential roadmap, right?
Sure.
For understanding and responding effectively when a breach happens.
Precisely.
And those 6 steps are preparation,
Crucial first step.
identification, containment, and intelligence development,
That's a big one.
eradication and remediation, recovery, and finally, lessons learned and follow-up. It's a structured, comprehensive approach designed to guide organizations through the chaos of an incident.
Okay, so moving into our next segment, let's talk about a common pitfall in incident response, one that many organizations face, often called the whack-a-mole problem.
Oh, I know exactly what you mean. That intense pressure, usually from management, right, to skip directly to eradication and remediation without truly understanding the full scope.
Yes, without knowing everything they've touched.
It's like blindly chasing attackers, making very little actual progress. You hit one piece of malware, another pops up somewhere else. Management's understandable fear of data loss often drives this, but it can actually make things far worse in the long run.
Precisely. If we connect this to the bigger picture, reacting too quickly without a sort of well-thought-out process just allows the adversary to redeploy assets, ensure their survivability inside the network.
They just adapt.
They adapt. Successful eradication can only happen once the full scope of the breach is understood. It's about being thoughtful, not just fast, being strategic.
So how do we get smart about this? How do we avoid the whack-a-mole?
Well, it's all about intelligence-driven containment. This is the phase where most response time is often spent, and the primary goal is to rapidly understand the adversary's actions, their motives, what they're after.
Okay.
A crucial strategy here is the power of threat intelligence collection. For instance, let's say Stark Research Labs discovers evil.exe in an unusual directory on one system. That immediately becomes an indicator of compromise. An IOC. This single IOC can then be rapidly replicated across SRL's entire enterprise to find other infected systems. It's a true force multiplier for defenders.
That makes sense. Find one, look for more everywhere.
Exactly. And there's a powerful historical example here. The Moonlight Maze intrusion from back in 1998. Early responders quickly learned that reacting too fast often led to an equal and frankly frustrating attacker response.
They just push back harder.
Right. The strategy evolved. It went from simply pulling the plug on compromised systems to things like imaging live systems and monitoring with a kill switch. They started using bridging firewalls, even keyloggers sometimes, to actively spy on the adversary.
Wow. Turning the tables.
It truly highlights that incident response is a sophisticated chess match, just as you said earlier.
And this isn't just a simple linear path either, is it? You mentioned identification and scoping and containment and intelligence development.
Yeah, they actually form this synergistic mini-cycle. Information you get during forensic analysis refines your scoping, which leads to new IOCs, which then help you find more systems.
Ah, okay. It feeds itself.
Exactly. It continuously enriches the understanding of the attack. It's this dynamic loop of discovery and refinement that constantly deepens the response team's understanding.
Okay, so you've scoped it, you've gathered intelligence, then comes remediation.
Yeah.
You said earlier it's rarely straightforward.
It really isn't.
Yeah.
Modern adversaries, like our fictional Crimson Osprey, they're incredibly skilled at avoiding detection and planning for survivability within a network. Failed remediation is unfortunately common.
Which forces teams right back to scoping again, right?
Often, yes. Typically, a hasty removal might prematurely reveal how the adversary was found. This lets them learn, prompting them to deploy new malware or maybe leverage existing backdoors they already set up to maintain access. This leads to that frustrating cycle of reinfection for the target organization.
So what's the strategic approach? How do you break that cycle?
We call them remediation events.
Okay, remediation events.
Yeah, these are carefully planned burst changes, often executed over a weekend or during a scheduled maintenance window.
To minimize disruption.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And their design is very specific. Deny the adversary access, prevent their immediate reaction, remove all their presence, and seriously degrade their ability to return.
Okay, so it's a coordinated push.
A very coordinated push.
Yeah.
Critical steps include things like disconnecting from the internet, blocking known command and control channels, removing infected systems, restricting compromised accounts, and, crucially, validating every single step, usually with two sets of eyes.
Why the validation?
Because leaving just one system compromised, one backdoor open, means the entire effort could unravel. You're forced to start all over again.
Right, gotta be Pharaoh.
Extremely. The ultimate goal, though, is pushing towards real-time remediation.
What does that look like?
Well, with proper visibility across an entire enterprise, remediation can, and ideally should, begin on day one of detection. But this requires complete enterprise visibility, mature processes, and significant proactive preparation.
So, investing up front.
Absolutely. Investing in what we sometimes call watchtowers, advanced monitoring capabilities, and strategically re-architecting networks to reduce the attack surface. It pays huge dividends in preventing attackers from establishing that persistent foothold in the first place.
This brings us to a fundamental distinction, doesn't it, between reactive versus hunting organizations?
Yes, a really key difference. A reactive organization, it basically waits for alerts, like a volunteer fire department waiting for that 911 call.
Okay.
A hunting organization, on the other hand, actively scours the enterprise to identify attacks already in progress, much more like security patrols looking for trouble before it escalates.
Proactive versus reactive.
Exactly. And the power of threat hunting lies in its human-centric approach. It's truly human versus human, with technology acting as that force multiplier we mentioned.
So hunters aren't just reacting to known bad stuff.
No, they're actively discovering novel detection methods, things that maybe aren't in the signature databases yet. And those discoveries can then be automated and pushed down to the Security Operations Center, the SOC, enhancing the overall defense capabilities. This is how organizations really elevate their security posture.
And cyber threat intelligence must be crucial for these hunt teams then.
Oh, absolutely crucial. It's like their strategic playbook. It tells them where to look like, what data might sophisticated actors, say Crimson Osprey, be interested in at Stark Research Labs.
Right.
It tells them what to look for specific artifacts, or maybe those living off the land binaries, the LO Eldons we'll talk more about, and even the likelihood of attack by specific threat groups targeting an organization like SRL.
So it focuses their efforts.
Immensely. And a vital aspect for hunters is cultivating the right mindset. It's about knowing the difference between normal and abnormal system behavior, even when you're not immediately finding obvious evil.
That sounds hard. Distinguishing subtle anomalies.
It takes experience and intuition. And for management, it's about supporting the hunt team, even when their efforts are, quote, too successful at finding breaches.
Meaning?
Meaning, you have to recognize that finding a breach is a success for the hunt team. It's not a failure of security overall. It's the process working. That support is paramount.
Okay, that makes sense. Let's shift our focus now to decoding adversary behavior using some established models and intelligence, starting with the attack lifecycle.
Right. Nearly all attacks, regardless of the specific actor, tend to progress through a series of common steps. You have the initial compromise.
Getting that first foot in the door.
Exactly. Then low privileges lateral movement, moving around maybe as a standard user. Then high privileges lateral movement, gaining admin rights and moving more freely. And finally, reaching their objective: asset access, data exfiltration, or maybe destructive attacks like ransomware.
And defenders use intelligence at each of these phases to try and disrupt that chain.
Correct. And a foundational model here is Lockheed Martin's cyber kill chain. It provides a really useful framework for categorizing these attack sequences and organizing detection indicators.
I've heard of the kill chain. What are the phases again?
There are 7: reconnaissance, weaponization, delivery, exploitation, installation, command and control, or C2, and finally, actions on objective.
And it categorizes indicators too, right?
Yes, into 3 main types. Atomic indicators are those standalone pieces of data, an IP address, a domain name, simple facts.
Okay.
Computed indicators are derived things like the cryptographic hash of a malicious file. You calculate it.
Got it.
But the most valuable are usually the behavioral indicators, also known as TTPs tactics, techniques, and procedures. These combine other indicators to form a profile of the adversary.
Like a criminal profile?
Kind of, yeah. For example, Crimson Osprey likes to use IP addresses in certain foreign countries to relay email, and they always use a specific custom malware dropper. It describes how they operate.
I see.
The ultimate goal for defenders is to push detection closer to the adversary, ideally finding more static indicators earlier in the chain, and reconstructing the entire kill chain to define campaigns before a full compromise occurs. That gives SRL that crucial early warning.
So the kill chain helps map the sequence. What about the specific actions within the network?
Well, building on that, we have the IRA ATT&CK framework. This is a huge, comprehensive knowledge base, specifically for describing post-compromise adversary behavior. Once they're inside, what do? ATT&CK is an excellent starting point for figuring out what to look for.
Okay, so it's like a library of attacker techniques.
Exactly. Its purpose is to expand knowledge, help prioritize defense efforts, and provide a standardized language for TTPs across the entire industry, so everyone's talking about the same things in the same way.
And what kind of categories does it cover?
It covers key phases mapping to adversary actions. Things like reconnaissance, initial access, execution, persistence, privilege escalation, defense evasion, credential access, discovery, lateral movement, collection, C2 again, exfiltration, and impact. It's very detailed.
How does that help a team like SRL's in practice?
Well, the real power comes when you apply it. Let's say SRL detects a specific malware, maybe something called double tap. Mapping that malware to the ATT&CK framework immediately provides a checklist of specific behaviors to hunt for.
Oh, okay.
It might suggest, okay, look for suspicious window schedule tasks, or analyze command line executions for specific patterns, or scrutinize NetFlow data for unusual ports that Crimson Osprey might be using. It gives the defense team a structured playbook to organize and prioritize their hunt efforts. Makes it much less random.
Got it. And central to all this intelligence gathering are indicators of compromise, IOCs.
Yes, IOCs. These are really a formal, precise language used to describe attacker tools and tradecraft. They facilitate that crucial information sharing and embody the describe once, find many approach.
Find one piece of evidence, use it to find more.
Precisely. But it's important to understand that IOCs vary wildly in their efficacy. Some are much better than others, and honestly, the most effective ones are often homegrown, derived from your own investigations, from real incidents at your organization, like those potentially faced by Stark research labs.
Because they're specific to the attacks you're actually seeing.
Exactly. Now, there are key standards for sharing and applying IOCs. STIX, which is the Structured Threat Information Expression, is one major standard, and YARA is another. It provides rules for identifying and classifying malware samples based on textual or binary patterns within the files themselves.
Can you give an example of a YARA rule?
Sure. So a YARA rule for, say, identifying CDUK malware might specify it needs an MZ signature, that's the standard Windows executable marker, maybe a file size limit to narrow it down, and then a set of specific strains that must be found inside the file, like maybe bpython27.dll or logoui.exe. The trick, though, is striking this delicate balance. You need to be specific enough to limit false positives. You don't want alarms going off constantly for legitimate files. But you also need to be broad enough to catch variants of the malware and not miss new evolutions of the same threat. It's a constant tuning process.
Finding that sweet spot.
Yeah, exactly.
Now let's explore something you mentioned earlier, what Jesse Kornblum famously called the malware paradox.
Yes. Malware can hide, but it must run.
It sounds simple, elegant even, but it's foundational for defenders, isn't it?
Absolutely. When malware executes, it has to interact with the operating system. And that interaction leaves telltale artifacts, especially these persistence mechanisms that allow it to survive system reboots or even survive remediation attempts sometimes. Understanding these artifacts gives us, the defenders, a crucial advantage.
So how do we structure an investigation to find these artifacts?
Well, the SANS FOR 508 intrusion methodology roadmap provides a really logical progression for a deep dive incident response. It starts with threat hunting and assessment.
Okay, step 1.
This involves large-scale data collection and analysis, often across thousands of endpoints. The focus here is on identifying statistical outliers and occurrences, basically what stands out from the normal baseline.
Finding the needle in the haystack by looking for things that are rare.
Pretty much. Next comes triage collection and analysis. This is more targeted data acquisition on specific systems that showed signs of interest during the first phase.
Zooming in.
Exactly. This helps us validate those initial findings and deepen our understanding. We're looking at things like application execution data, file system changes, maybe in-memory artifacts specific to a system that we suspect Crimson Osprey might have touched at SRL.
And the final stage.
That's duck dive forensics. This is reserved for an intensive, really in-depth analysis on just a handful of key systems. This is where we meticulously reconstruct the attacker's tradecraft, understand their specific techniques, and build new, highly effective IOCs to feed back into our detection systems, sharpening the tools.
Makes sense. And when we're hunting for this evil, how do we categorize the systems we find? Are they all the same?
No, definitely not. We tend to categorize compromised systems into 3 types for hunting purposes. The easiest to detect are systems with active malware.
Because it's running, leaving lots of traces.
Right, thanks to their rich, ongoing artifacts.
Yeah.
Then there are systems with dormant malware. These are harder because they might involve one-time tools the attacker used and then removed, or systems that have been partially cleaned but still leave residual traces. Requires more digging.
Okay.
And the hardest to detect are systems without tools or malware at all.
How does that work?
They're relying instead on those living off the land techniques we mentioned, using legitimate system tools or maybe valid credentials they've stolen. These require not just excellent data collection, but even better human analysts who can spot those really subtle anomalies.
Right, the human element again. So the detection process itself spans a spectrum, doesn't it?
It does. From highly automated to very manual, human-driven hunting, we start with the enterprise-wide automated signatures. Your antivirus, your endpoint detection and response EDR platform, previously identified IOCs, the first line of defense.
Standard stuff.
Right. If those don't catch it, we move to triage. This is where human hunters get involved, looking for aberrant characteristics, those persistence mechanisms, doing deep log analysis, tracing lateral movement.
More hands-on investigation.
Exactly. And ultimately, that deep dive forensics is for those truly anomalous candidates that bubble up. The goal there is twofold. Validate the compromise, and crucially, create new threat intelligence that can then be automated back into the SOC, constantly improving our defenses against sophisticated actors like Crimson Osprey.
You mentioned even clean systems leave residue. How do we detect compromised endpoints if there's no active malware?
Well, this is where the enormous set of forensic artifacts comes in. Even systems where Crimson Osprey used only living off the land techniques or tried to clean up still leave digital breadcrumbs.
Like what kind of breadcrumb?
Okay, so think about prefetch files. Windows creates these to speed up application loading, so they log executed programs. Shimcache tracks application compatibility shims, often revealing programs run even if deleted. Jump lists record recently opened files and applications tied to the taskbar. And of course, event logs capture a vast array of system activities, log-on, service starts, errors.
So tons of data.
Tons. Familiarity with these artifacts is what we sometimes call conversational forensics, knowing what these artifacts normally track, what looks weird, and how to interpret them in the context of a potential intrusion.
And adversaries like Crimson Osprey, they try to hide, right?
Oh yeah, often by attempting to hide in plain sight. It's a simple but effective tactic. They might use common malware names that mimic legitimate Windows processes, things like svcoast.exe, iexplore.exe, or lsas.exe.
Things you expect to see.
Exactly. They also choose common malware locations, planting their tools in places like temp app data, maybe the recycle bin, or even right inside Windows System 32.
So the key takeaway here is that context is absolutely everything, isn't it?
Absolutely. Does it make sense for a program named iexplore.exe to be executing from, say, the recycle bin? Probably not.
Right.
Or for svcoast.exe to be running from an unexpected directory or making network connections it shouldn't? You have to stay curious, stay suspicious, and always question the context.
And related to hiding in plain sight is this idea of living off the land binaries, LOL bins.
Yes, a rapidly growing technique for evasion. These are legitimate signed system binaries that attackers abuse. Think rundle32.exe, normally used for running DLLs, or bitsadmin.exe, typically for Windows updates or file transfers, or certintel.exe for certificate management.
So tools already on the system.
Exactly. They're increasingly abused by attackers, specifically to evade security tools that might flag unknown or unsigned executables, the Lullabot project living off the land binaries. And Scripts actually documents these surprising and often legitimate-looking use cases.
So how do you detect malicious use of a legitimate tool?
Crucially, the full command lines provide the essential context. What arguments were passed to bitsadmin.exe? What URL did it download from? What child processes did runtul32.exe spawn? That context tells the story.
Makes sense. And beyond LOL bins, malware uses other evasion techniques.
Oh, a wide array. Things like service hijacking, various forms of process injection, DLL injection like we'll discuss more later, rootkits to hide deep in the OS, fileless malware that tries to reside only in memory, packing or armoring to obfuscate the code, and various anti-forensics methods to try and erase tracks.
Sounds daunting.
It can be, but remember the malware paradox. Every single evasion technique, no matter how clever, creates its own unique artifacts. Defenders can learn to spot the signs of packing, the indicators of process injection, the remnants of anti-forensics. It's a constant cat-and-mouse game.
Okay. And another paradox involves signed code, right? We stress signed code, but
we shouldn't always. Code signing is intended to verify the origin and integrity of software, building trust. But we've seen notorious examples where malware authors steal legitimate code signing certificates. Flame, Stuxnet, incidents involving Adobe, Opera. They all use stolen certs to make their malware look legitimate.
so signed doesn't automatically mean safe.
Not automatically. However, there's a critical insight here for defenders. McAfee reports that less than 3% of all malware is actually signed.
Less than 3%.
Yeah, that's a huge strategic advantage for hunters. It dramatically narrows the haystack. It means you can and should prioritize suspicious unsigned code.
Okay.
And if you see unsigned code running from critical system locations, like see Windows System 32, that's an immediate high-priority red flag.
Right.
That's a strong indicator that someone like Crimson Osprey might be active.
Got it. Prioritize the unsigned, especially in sensitive locations. Okay, let's pivot now to unpacking malware persistence in more detail.
Right. Persistence is such a lucrative early-stage target for defenders. Why? Because long-term access is often required for attackers to achieve their ultimate goals, whatever they may be. They need to stick around.
So finding how they stick around is key to kicking them out.
Exactly. And the good news is there's a relatively manageable set of common mechanisms that adversaries primarily rely on. It's not infinite.
Okay, what are the big ones?
Well, auto-start locations and Windows services combined make up over 80% of what we typically see in the wild for persistence.
80%. That's
Yeah.
huge. So focusing there gives a lot of bang for your buck.
Definitely. For auto-start locations, think of all the common places where Windows automatically starts programs when a user logs in or the system boots up. Various run registry keys are classics found in both the ntuser.dat hive for the user and the software hive for the machine.
We're run keys.
Also, the user init key, which specifies what runs at logon. And surprisingly, the simple startup folder, remember that, in the user's profile.
Yeah, seems almost too simple.
I know. But what's old is new again. We're seeing a huge resurgence in attackers using that basic startup folder for persistence.
Wow. So how do we detect these?
For detecting these auto-start mechanisms, tools like Registry Explorer or Regripper for offline analysis are great. For live systems or scaled collection, Microsoft's AutoRens is fantastic, and frameworks like Canada, which we'll talk about later, can collect this data across an entire enterprise.
And once you have the data?
Then frequency analysis becomes really powerful. You collect all the auto-run entries from thousands of machines at Stark Research Labs, and you look for the outliers, those programs or registry entries that appear on only one or maybe a handful of systems rather than thousands. Those are often the malicious ones, hiding among the legitimate entries.
Find the unique thing. Okay, so that's auto starts. What about Windows services?
Right, Windows services like the DHCP client service or the Windows event log service, these can be abused because they often run with high privileges, they run in the background, and critically, they often start even before antivirus software fully loads.
Ah, getting in early.
Exactly. Attackers can create entirely new malicious services. APT1, for example, notoriously used the IPRP service this way. They can replace legitimate services with malicious ones, like the GlassRat malware replacing the RasAuto service. Or they can even manipulate the service failure recovery options, configuring Windows to automatically restart their malware if it crashes or gets terminated.
Clever. How do we find that?
Again, AutoRuns is great for listing services and their configurations. The native C command in Windows can query service details. Kanza has a specific script, get-svcfail.ps1, just for checking those service recovery options. And of course, diligently scrutinizing Windows event logs for unusual service creations, modifications, or crashes is key.
Okay, auto starts services. What else is common for persistence?
Scheduled tasks are another granular and powerful way for attackers to persist. While the older @.exe command is still sometimes used, the more modern shasks.exe is more common now and offers better logging capabilities, especially in Vista and later.
And why are tasks attractive to attackers?
Well, they offer fine-grained control over when something runs. But the real danger often lies in their remote capabilities. Tasks can be created and run on remote machines, so they're often abused not just for persistence but also for lateral movement and even running credential dumping tools across the network.
Ah, multi-purpose.
Very much so.
Yeah.
And to bring it back to a high-profile example, remember the SolarWinds attack? The Sunspide implant, the component responsible for injecting the back door, notoriously used a scheduled task for its own persistence. Imagine Crimson Osprey setting up a similar task to maintain its foothold inside Stark Research Labs.
Right, real-world impact. Okay, what about more stealthy techniques?
Good question. DLL hijacking attacks fall into that category. There are particularly stealthy persistence methods because they cleverly exploit legitimate Windows features related to how programs load dynamic link libraries, or DLLs.
How does that work?
There are several types. One is DLL search order hijacking. Windows searches for DLLs in a specific order of locations. An attacker can place a malicious DLL with the same name as a legitimate one, but put it in a location that gets searched earlier. So a legitimate program, like explorer.exe, might accidentally load the attacker's malicious nt-shariui.dll from the Windows folder instead of the legitimate one somewhere else.
Tricking the program into loading the wrong library.
Exactly. Then there's phantom DLL hijacking. This exploits applications that try to load DLLs that don't actually exist anymore, maybe leftovers from old versions or ones that are easily replaceable, like a common one named fxsst.dll. The attacker just provides their malicious version.
Filling a vacuum.
Sort of, yeah. And DLL sideloading is another popular one. This uses a Windows feature called side-by-side SXS assemblies. Attackers can introduce an updated malicious DLL right alongside a legitimate, even signed executable. Malware like PlugX and NetTraveler have used this extensively.
Making it look like a legitimate update.
Precisely. And finally, relative path DLL hijacking. This involves copying a legitimate executable that's susceptible to this kind of attack into a writable location, like user temp space, along with a malicious DLL of the same name it expects to find. Groups like APT32 and malware like Poison Ivy have used this.
Okay, that's a lot of ways to hijack DLLs. How do we detect them? It sounds tricky.
It can be. Detection often involves looking for anomalies. File system analysis might reveal new or unsigned executables or DLLs appearing in unusual places. Timelining can show when these files were created relative to other activity. Memory analysis is powerful here. You can show processes that have loaded DLLs from strange or unexpected paths.
Looking for the odd one out again.
Right. And importantly, you also look for the other actions these hijacked DLLs inevitably perform. They're not just sitting there. They're usually doing something malicious, like establishing network beacons, injecting code into other processes, dropping more files. Those actions create more artifacts. Tools like Velociraptor even offer specific VQL queries to detect suspicious forwarded functions within DLLs, which are often abused pointers telling a legitimate program to load a malicious component instead.
Wow, okay. That's intricate. Is there anything else major for persistence?
One more powerful and often overlooked method is WMI, Event Consumer Backdoors.
WMI, Windows Management Instrumentation.
That's the one. WMI allows for powerful system management, but it also allows attackers to set up triggers, which are called event filters, that automatically execute scripts or executables with system privileges when certain conditions are met.
System privileges, that's bad.
That's very bad. It's typically a three-step process. First, the attacker creates an event filter. This defines the trigger, maybe something simple like every 20 seconds, or something more complex like when a user logs off.
Okay, the trigger.
Second, they create an event consumer. This specifies the action to take when the filter triggers, usually running a script, like a PowerShell beacon calling back to their C2, or executing a malicious binary.
The action.
And third, they create a binding, which simply ties the specific filter to the specific consumer. Trigger happens, action executes.
That sounds incredibly powerful and potentially very quiet.
It is. And the history here is compelling. Stuxnet itself, that infamous worm that targeted Iranian nuclear facilities, used a WMI event consumer for persistence. Now we see ransomware and crypto worms leveraging this subtle technique too.
So how do we find these WMI backdoors?
Tools like AutoRuns and Kanza can help enumerate WMI persistence mechanisms. The native PowerShell getWMI object, cmdlet, can also query for these objects directly. You specifically want to focus on looking for command line event consumers and active script event consumers, as those are the types that execute commands or scripts.
Anything to watch out for.
Yeah, a word of caution. Be careful with overly broad allow listing or ignoring things that look legitimate. The Bad Rabbit ransomware, for instance, actually named its malicious component SIEM event consumer to try and blend in with normal system activity.
Freaky.
Very. For large-scale detection, say across all of Stark research labs, you can use PowerShell remoting to query for these WMI objects on all systems and send the details directly to your central logging platform like Splunk or an ELK stack for analysis and alerting.
Okay, that covers persistence really well. Now let's shift gears to the tools of the trade. Responding across a large enterprise seems like a massive challenge.
It is. The scale challenge is immense. You're talking about acquiring and analyzing data from potentially hundreds or thousands of remote systems, often under severe time constraints during an active incident. You simply need rapid, scalable tooling to respond effectively.
So what are the key tools?
Well, PowerShell is truly the future of Windows administration. And frankly, it's the present too. It's the de facto tool, available on all modern Windows versions.
Just a command line, right?
It's much more than that. It's an incredibly powerful scripting language. It gives you direct access to Windows Management Instrumentation, WMI, the entire .NET Framework, Component Object Model, AKM. Its intuitive verb-noun naming scheme, like get process or get service, makes it relatively easy to learn. And crucially, its output is structured objects, not just text, which allows for incredibly flexible filtering, sorting, and post-processing using pipes.
Okay, more powerful than the old cmd.exe. But how does it help with scale?
The real game changer for incident response is PowerShell remoting. It leverages underlying technologies called WinRM and WS management, which are encrypted by default and typically use Kerberos for authentication. This allows you to run commands remotely.
Like SSH for Windows?
Kind of, yeah. You can use Enter PS Session to get an interactive shell on a remote machine. But even more critical for IR is invoke command. This lets you run a script block concurrently, in parallel, across dozens, hundreds, even thousands of systems from one central point.
One-to-many execution.
Exactly. And the efficiency is astounding. Testing shows invoke command can query, say, 1,000 systems for running processes in just about 131 seconds. Why? Because it pushes the processing out to the remote hosts, they do the work, and only send back the results. It's incredibly efficient for a large enterprise like Stark Research Labs.
That's fast. What about security? Running commands everywhere sounds risky.
That's a great point. PowerShell authentication is actually quite secure by default. It typically uses non-delegated Kerberos, which helps prevent credential or token stealing issues common with other methods. It also relies on non-interactive logons when using invoke command. so no cache credentials are left behind on the target systems. This makes it a significantly safer choice for large-scale data collection than using something like RDP or traditional batch scripts that might expose credentials. You do need to be careful about enabling less secure options like CredSSP, though.
Okay, so PowerShell is the engine. Are there tools built on PowerShell for IR?
Absolutely. A key one is Kanza. This is Dave Hull's PowerShell IR framework, designed specifically for enterprise-scale data collection during incident response.
Kanza. What does it do?
It cleverly uses PowerShell remoting as its transport. It can query Active Directory to get a list of target systems. It gracefully handles errors if systems are offline. It manages parallel execution across hundreds of systems simultaneously. And it organizes all the collected output into easy-to-parse, tab-separated value, TSD files. Usually one file per type of data collected.
How easy is it to use?
It's designed to be straightforward. A simple command like kanza.ps1-target list host list -pushbin gets it going. The real power comes from its modules, which are just PowerShell scripts that define exactly what data to collect, things like running processes, network connections, registry keys, event logs, and it tries to collect them respecting the order of volatility where possible.
So it's extensible.
Very. And there was a significant advancement, the Epic upgrade, contributed by John Ketchum and the team at USAA. They transformed Kanzi from a useful tool into a truly massive distributed collection platform.
How massive?
Their version scaled it to collect data from over 150,000 systems. They added features like load balancing across collector servers, fire and forget modules that send data asynchronously back to central ELK stacks, and crucial safety mechanisms like network kill switches and EDR safe words to prevent Kanza from conflicting with security tools. It's an amazing example of open-source community innovation tackling real-world enterprise challenges.
Wow, 150,000 systems. That's serious scale. Okay, what else is in the toolkit?
Another essential free tool is KPE, which stands for the Cole Artifact Parser and Extractor. This comes from Eric Zimmerman, who's legendary in the DFIR community for his tools.
KPE, what's its focus?
KPE is designed as a forensically sound triage collection and post-processing tool. It excels at preserving metadata, creating detailed audit logs of its actions, accessing volume shadow copies to get historical versions of files, handling locked files that other tools might skip, and even deduplicating collected data to save space and analysis time.
Forensically sound triage, so quick collection, but careful about preserving evidence.
Exactly. It's very flexible and extensible, too. It uses configuration files called targets, like a pre-built one called sanstriage.tk, which define exactly what specific artifacts KP should collect: registry hives, event logs, browser history, prefetch files, etc. And the collected results can be zipped up and sent directly to an SFTP server or even cloud storage for remote analysis.
Very useful for grabbing key evidence quickly. Any other major tools for scale?
Yes. The last big one we should cover is Velociraptor. This is a scalable, query-based, multi-OS digital forensics and incident response tool. It was originally created by Michael Cohen, another big name, and is now maintained by Rapid7.
Velociraptor. Sounds fast, is it?
It's designed for speed and scale, yes. It can easily support 10,000 or more connected endpoints or clients on just a single server. And with multi-front-end deployments, people have scaled it to 125,000 clients or more.
How does it work?
Its core is VQL, the Velociraptor query language. It's a powerful, flexible language, somewhat SQL-like, that allows you to create incredibly specific queries to ask questions of your endpoints. These queries can be run point in time, show me current network connections, or they can be configured to continuously stream results back for ongoing monitoring of things like event logs, process starts, or DNS queries.
Continuous monitoring, okay.
It also offers an interactive shell for digging into a single machine, and it can even be used as a standalone triage collection tool, similar in concept to KD, for running on air-gapped systems.
You mentioned VQL. Is it hard to learn?
There's a learning curve, like any query language, but Velociraptor makes it easier through the concept of artifacts.
Velociraptor artifacts.
Yeah, these are essentially predefined, stored VQL queries designed for common analysis jobs. Things like listing processes, enumerating logged-on users, collecting auto-runs data, searching for files. There's a large library built in.
So you don't have to write VQL from scratch every time.
Exactly. And they're designed to be user-friendly and incredibly easy to modify. You can clone a built-in artifact and tweak it. For instance, maybe change a process search that just looks at the process name to also include the full command line for more context. There's even an artifact exchange where the community shares custom artifacts they've created, building this rich, shared library of detection and collection capabilities.
How do you use these artifacts for hunting across the enterprise?
Hunting with Velociraptor is typically done via its Wave UI. You configure a hunt, which is essentially scheduling a specific artifact or a raw VQL query to run across a group of clients. Then you review the collected results through the Notebook tab. This Notebook interface is really powerful because it allows further VQL-driven transformations on the collected data. You can filter, sort, group, and stack the data right there to find anomalies.
So analysis is built in too.
A lot of it is yes. For larger deployments, like at Stark Research Labs potentially, while you can do a lot in the notebooks, you might also export the results to CSV or JSON or configure Velociraptor to send data directly to your main SIEM like Elastic or Splunk for broader aggregation and correlation.
It sounds incredibly versatile.
It really is. Its capabilities are extensive, covering things like file system timeline creation, memory acquisition, parsing prefetch and event logs, running YORA scans across endpoints, and it works across Windows, Linux, and Mac. A truly powerful tool for modern DFIR.
Okay, fantastic overview of the tools. Now let's get into what feels like the holy grail for attackers, credential theft.
Ah, yes, the keys to the kingdom. For almost any adversary, gaining higher privileges and moving laterally within a network is absolutely essential for achieving their goals, and that almost always involves stealing credentials.
So credential harvesting becomes priority number one for them.
Absolutely. Often immediately after they get that initial foothold. Why? Because nearly everything in a Windows environment is tied to an account and its privileges. You need privileged accounts to move freely, access sensitive data, deploy ransomware, whatever their objective is.
And the scary part is how easy it can be once they have credentials, right?
Exactly. The ease and, critically, the stealth with which attackers can move once they have legitimate credentials is a major problem. It makes detection much harder. This also highlights the danger of sleeper accounts, compromised credentials that might escape initial remediation efforts, allowing an attacker like Crimson Osprey persistent access long after they appear to have been kicked out of Stark Research Labs.
So how do we detect credential abuse?
Detection really focuses on auditing account activity. You need good visibility from your event logs, specifically looking for unusual logins. Type, time, source, edit, destination, any suspicious account creation or modification, and especially privileged account usage. Similarly, on Unix Linux systems, the secure logs are vital.
What kind of anomalies are red flags?
Things like workstation-to-workstation logons using administrative accounts, which often isn't normal user behavior. Activity happening way outside of normal business hours. Logins from unexpected geographic locations. And a huge vulnerability we still see everywhere is the use of shared local administrator accounts across multiple machines. If an attacker gets that one password, they potentially have admin rights on hundreds of systems.
What are the basic defenses there?
Well, the ideal is unique, strong passwords for all local administrator accounts. And where possible, denying network logins for these local admin accounts, except maybe the built-in RID 500 administrator, sometimes needed for recovery. Tools like Microsoft LAPS, the Local Administrator Password Solution, are a free and effective way to automate the management of unique local admin passwords across a domain.
Microsoft has been working on mitigating credential theft for a long time, haven't they?
Oh yes, they've made significant efforts over the decades. Though frankly, the need to maintain backward compatibility has often presented persistent challenges, sometimes leaving older, weaker protocols enabled by default.
What were some key milestones?
Well, back in the Vista and Windows 7 era, we saw the introduction of user account control, UAC, trying to limit the impact of running as admin all the time, and managed service accounts for securing service credentials. But Windows 8.1 was a huge leap forward.
What changed in 8.1?
Several critical things. Protocols like CredSSP, TSP-KG, and WeJust, which previously could cache plaintext passwords in memory under certain conditions, no longer do so by default. Huge win. New security groups were introduced to help restrict local administrators from performing network logins. Protected processes, like the critical LSAS process that holds credentials in memory, were enhanced to only load specially signed code, making them much harder for malware to tamper with. Restricted admin mode for RDP was introduced to prevent sending credentials over the wire.
Sounds like a lot of improvements.
It was. But perhaps the most transformative change in Windows 8.1 was the introduction of the Domain Protected User Security Group. What does that group do? It's specifically designed to provide strong protection for high-value accounts, like domain admins. When an account is a member of this group, Windows denies the use of weaker authentication protocols like NTLM and CredSSP. It prevents the operating system from caching the user's credentials locally. It prevents credential delegation, which stops certain pass-the-ticket attacks, and it significantly reduces the lifetime of their Kerberos tickets. It was a genuine game-changer for protecting critical domain accounts.
And Windows 10 and 11 built on that?
Yes, they continued the advancements, notably with Credential Guard. This uses hypervisor-based virtualization, the same tech behind virtual machines, to isolate the LSAS process and sensitive credential material like hashes and Kerberos tickets in a secure, protected memory space that even the main OS kernel can't directly access.
Wow, using virtualization for security.
It's another true game changer, making memory scraping attacks much, much harder. Windows 10.11 also introduced Remote Credential Guard, which updates that restricted admin concept for RDP, and Device Guard, now part of Windows Defender Application Control, which provides robust application whitelisting to prevent malicious code execution in the first place.
Okay, so Microsoft has provided tools. Let's dig into how attackers actually compromise credentials, starting with hashes.
Right. Hashes, these are essentially one-way cryptographic representations of passwords. We mainly talk about LM hashes, which are very old and deprecated now, but sometimes still exist, and NT hashes, which are the standard. You find these in the SAM registry hive for local machine accounts, or stored within the LSAS process memory for domain accounts that have logged onto a system.
How do attackers get them?
Typically via memory extraction directly from the LSAS process, or by dumping the LSAS process memory to disk for offline analysis, or by extracting the SAM registry hive. All of these actions generally require administrator privileges on the target system.
And once they have the hash, what can they do?
Two main things. They can try to crack the hash back into the original plaintext password using tools like John the Ripper or Hashcat, often with the help of pre-computed rainbow tables. Or, more efficiently, and perhaps more dangerously, they can use the hash directly for authentication in what's called a pass-the-hash attack. This leverages the underlying NTLM authentication protocol, allowing an attacker to log into other systems using just the stolen hash, without ever needing to know the actual password.
Impersonating the user without the password.
Exactly. Tools like the infamous mimikatz, older ones like FGGump or GSecDump, Metasploit modules, WCE, Credump, they all facilitate hash extraction. Running GSecJump on a domain controller, for example, could potentially reveal the NT hashes for all domain user accounts if not properly secured. Scary stuff.
How do we defend against hash theft?
Defending hashes comes back to fundamental security hygiene. First and foremost, prevent attackers from getting administrator privileges in the first place. Avoid interactive logons onto servers or workstations using highly privileged accounts whenever possible. Properly terminate RDP sessions using logoff, not just disconnecting, as disconnected sessions can leave credentials in memory. Group policy time limits can help enforce this. And critically, leverage those Windows 8.1 and later mitigations we discussed. Ensure WDigest TSPKG caching is off by default. Use protected admin restricted admin modes. Make extensive use of the domain protected user group for sensitive accounts. Enable protected processes for LSAS. Deploy Credential Guard if possible. And use LAPS for local admin passwords. Multiple layers are key.
Okay, that's hashes. What about tokens?
Right, tokens. After a user successfully authenticates, Windows creates a security token. This object contains the user's security context, their identity, group memberships, privileges. There are different types, but attackers are mainly interested in impersonate tokens, which allow them to act as another logged-on user within the local system's security context, and delegate tokens, which are more powerful and allow impersonation across the network for single sign-on purposes.
How do they get these tokens?
Attackers who have gained privileges, like SIEM impersonate, often held by service accounts, or full administrator system access, can potentially extract tokens belonging to other users currently logged onto the same system.
And what do they use them for?
Often for privilege escalation. For example, if a domain admin is logged onto a server that the attacker compromises as a local admin, the attacker might be able to steal a domain admin's token and instantly gain domain-wide privileges. They can also be used to bypass certain security mechanisms like protected process protections. Servers are particularly lucrative targets for token theft because many users, including privileged ones, might be logged on simultaneously. And again, improper RDP session termination, just disconnecting instead of logging off, is a common source of accessible tokens left lingering in memory.
What tools are used for token manipulation?
Tools like Incognito, now part of Metasploit, Metasploit itself, various PowerShell scripts, and of course Mimikatz are commonly used. Mimikatz has powerful commands like token.list to see available tokens and token.elevate domain admin, which tries to find and impersonate a token belonging to domain admin if one exists on the system. It can be incredibly fast privilege escalation.
And defending against token theft?
The defenses are very similar to defending hashes. Prevent the initial administrator compromise. stop allowing remote interactive sessions onto servers for highly privileged accounts, and force proper RDP session termination. You can also configure specific accounts in Active Directory with the account is sensitive and cannot be delegated setting, which prevents the creation of delegate tokens for that account. And again, the domain protected user security group is critical here, as members cannot have delegate tokens created for them. Remote Credential Guard also helps mitigate risks associated with RDP.
Okay, hashes and tokens rely on active sessions or memory. What about credentials stored elsewhere, like cached credentials?
Good point. Cached credentials, sometimes called cached domain logons. Windows stores a hashed version of domain credentials locally to allow users to log onto their machines even when a domain controller is unavailable, like when they're offline or the network is down. By default, Windows usually caches the hash derived from the last 10 successful domain logins. This was increased to 25 for Server 2008. These cached hashes persist in the security cache registry key.
How are those acquired?
Acquiring them requires administrator or system privileges on the local machine to access the protected security registry hive. Offline tools like credump can parse the hive and extract these cached hashes.
Can they be used for pass the hash?
No. Importantly, they cannot. Cached credentials use a different hashing format known as mscache2, or DCC2. This format is salted and case-sensitive, making it much slower and harder to brute force crack compared to NT hashes. So attackers must crack them into plaintext passwords to use them. They can't just pass the hash.
So harder to use, but still valuable if cracked. How do we defend?
Again, preventing administrator compromise is paramount. You can also limit the number of cache logins stored via a registry value, cached logins count. Setting it to 0 or 1 reduces the window of opportunity. Enforcing strong password policies makes cracking harder. And once again, the domain-protected user security group provides excellent protection, as cached credentials are not stored for members of this group.
Okay, one last category. LSA secrets. What are those?
LSA secrets. These are sensitive credentials that Windows stores in a protected area of the registry, specifically under security policy secrets. These are often credentials used by services or scheduled tasks that need to run under a specific user context, rather than as a system. This can include things like stored VPN passwords, credentials for auto logon configurations, passwords for ISA application pools, or credentials used by third-party software services.
What makes these attractive to attackers?
Service accounts are often the biggest draw here. Why? Because service account credentials are often configured once and rarely changed. They frequently have significant privileges within the domain, and the same service account might be used across many systems. Compromising one service account credential stored as an LSA secret could give Crimson Osprey widespread access within Stark research labs.
How do attackers get them?
Like the SAM and security hives, accessing the encrypted LSA secrets data and the necessary decryption keys requires administrator privileges. But the critical difference here is that once decrypted, these passwords are often stored in clear text.
Clear text, not hashes.
Often clear text, yes, which makes them immediately usable. Tools like the classic Keen-enable, Metasploit modules, Mimikits, elsadump.secrets, gsecdump, credump, and various PowerShell scripts can extract and decrypt these secrets. A notable example is the getelsasecret.ps1 script from the Nishang Offensive PowerShell framework.
It seems like attackers have lots of tools for this.
They do. And what's fascinating here is the cleverness of how some tools work. For example, Nishang includes another script called Enable Duplicate Token, which attempts to programmatically gain the necessary debug privileges required to access the LSA process and dump secrets, even if the attacker is initially running as a standard administrator without those specific rights enabled. It's a testament to the attacker's ingenuity in finding and exploiting these hidden pathways to credentials.
Wow. That covers a huge amount on credentials. What an incredible journey this deep dive has been. We've covered such a vast amount of ground today.
We really have. From understanding the shifting threat landscape in that foundational 6-step incident response process.
Right, all the way to dissecting adversary behaviors through crucial models like the cyber kill chain and the MITRE ATT&CK framework.
Then we dove deep into malware persistence techniques, the run keys, services, tasks, DLL hijacking, WMI.
And perhaps most importantly for practical defense, we mastered those essential enterprise-scale hunting tools like Kanza, KPE, and especially the power of Velociraptor.
And finally, exploring the critical world of credential theft hashes, tokens, cache creds, LSA secrets, and the robust defenses available, especially in modern Windows versions.
We truly hope this deep dive equips you, our listener, with not just knowledge, but a really practical roadmap for proactive defense. You should now have a much better grasp of how the best teams are fighting back, leveraging sophisticated tools and intelligence to reduce that attacker dwell time and effectively counter advanced threats like Crimson Osprey.
Absolutely. The goal is to empower you to be part of the solution.
So here's a final provocative thought for you to consider. The constant evolution of attacker techniques means this battlefield is never static. What new, legitimate, but abused system features, or maybe subtle credential attack vectors we didn't even cover today, might adversaries exploit next? And how can your newfound understanding of these deep dive concepts help you anticipate and perhaps even counter them before they become the next widespread threats? Keep digging, stay curious, and keep learning.